We'll start off with the Angular. So in the app.module.ts, it's basically the app.anything is the entry point of the application. So here we're just importing all of the modules, all the components, the guards, and any services that are used, and then creating the routes for the application. So nothing will just go to the dashboard, which is basically the home page. Register, login, profile, create device. These are all just linked to the components that we have, which we'll go into when we discuss those. There's not much else to say about this file, except for that we're using a guard here. So basically what that means is a user has to be logged in to access these pages. So I think it's all of them except for register and login. So we'll just start off with that guard. So all it's doing is just basically checking whether we're logged in. It's using a service that I've created myself. So we'll go into this file. So here you've got the components, which is just reusable code. So with the Angular, you can split up your front end code into components. So that way you can just plug it in wherever you need it, as opposed to having to rewrite code more than once. Services are basically things that connect the front end to the back end, so you don't have to include it in the components file. So that way it's reusable in its own sense. So here we're registering a user, authenticating a user, getting their profile, storing the user data within local storage, and I'll say later on why that's useful. Loading a token. A token is basically it's something used to authenticate a user. The guard used, it's basically checking whether we're logged in. So logged in is just checking whether we haven't. So it's using a function that's made from Angular 2 JWT library. So it's already built in when you get that library. So it's just checking whether the token is not expired, and tokens used to authenticate it, as I said earlier. So going into the components, we'll start off with the login and logout, or register, sorry. So as I said before, you can create your components and then plug them in wherever you want. The banner is basically this left-hand side. So towards the start of the development, when I created this, I couldn't figure out how to create tabs, like as you can see here. So if you look at the URL, you can see that it's changing when I'm clicking these, because they're actually two different components. So for each component, I'm basically using the banner, and then I'm using the tabs, which is basically just that. These two boxes, similar to a normal HTML form, just creating so with the Angular you can create these two-way binding variables. So basically, if we go into the register, you can basically create, or here I'm creating a user object, which I've defined here in the models. So it's very similar to the database schema. So we've got just a name, username, email, password, and user type, which you can see here. Name, username, email, password, and then the user type here. So yeah, it basically just binds it to those to this user object, and then when you're registering, all it's doing is this checking the validation. Although this isn't needed anymore, because here it's got a built-in validation check, where basically next to all of the fields that you need required, you just write required. When it's doing that, it's basically using the authenticate service to register a user. So we'll go to the authenticate services, authentication. Yeah, so it's just registering. So basically what you're doing is you're creating headers for the post request. So you just set any content type to JSON format, and you're directing it to the right endpoint for the server, which we'll go into when we discuss the back end. But it's basically just users slash register, passing the user into the body, and then in the headers, it's just passing this. And that's basically the structure of most of the requests that are made. In this application, you've just got the headers, which is a JSON, the endpoint, the object that you're passing through, and then the headers. And then when you're done with that, it's going to return or return something from the server. And then one of the fields is success, just to show whether it's been successful or not. So if it's successful, you'll just be told it will be, and you'll navigate to the login screen. Otherwise, you'll just be told that something went wrong. Similar to register, you've got the login. So here you're just checking whether the username and password has been set. So here we've got two fields, or two variables, sorry, username and password. So just these two. And as I said before, with the register, these are all binding. So these are bound to those two variables here. Sorry, these two. So here we're just checking whether they're set, and if they are, then we'll create a user object. And then in the authenticate service, we're just authenticating a user, just using the username. So it's got the user based on that. And then what it's doing is it'll compare the passwords using a function that I've created here, which basically it hashes the input password, because when you're registering, basically hashing the password with this bcrypt library. So when you have to compare the password, you have to then hash it again, the input one, so you can do the comparison. So it's just a very simple login and register. We'll go into the dashboard. So there are three different views for the dashboard, so as you have three different users. So if you're an admin, so the way that it checks is admin is basically if the user is equal to admin, and the user is basically using so it's checking the local storage. So when you log in, some user information is stored in the local storage. So you check whether the search input is empty, and these are different ways that they can be empty. Whether you've clicked on it and then you've written something and you've deleted what you've written. So that'll technically be this, but say you haven't input anything, it could either be undefined or null. So what you're doing is, or what it's doing. So what it's doing is, so the query, so the search query, we're just changing that to lowercase just so it matches the tags that we're storing in the devices. So I'll just pull up the device data structure. So you've got the ID, the name, price, all of these, and then you've got the tags. And the tags, they consist of the name, the manufacturer, and within the technology it will be, so just to show you, so you've got the category and the feature. So that's how you're storing the technology. So it will be an object. So the technology will be an array. So it will be there'll be an array of then objects, and then within those objects you'll have category, and then whatever the category name is, so we'll just call it connectivity, and then you'll have an array of all of the features, so an array of objects, and then within each object there'll be the feature name, so we'll call this Wi-Fi, and then you'll have the evidence, which will be an object. So you'll have, sorry, it'll be like this. So then within this evidence you have the source of the evidence, a media type, you have the title, the purpose, and the origin. So these will all have values, each of these, this, and this. So that's what the technology will look like. So for the tags, you'll just have each category and each feature added, as well as the device name and the manufacturer. So because in JavaScript you can't check whether, say, a value is in an array, what you have to do is you have to use this just to check whether it exists. There's no, like, say, I know there might be something in jQuery, but you can't use jQuery in Angular. So basically normally you would do say dot exists and then whatever the value is, but you can't do that here. So all you have to do is just check whether the index of the value that you're searching for does not, so if it equals to -1, then that means it doesn't exist, but if it doesn't, then it means it exists. So if you know whether it exists, then you can pass in, so basically queried devices is just an array of all the devices that match the query. So if the query is within the tags, then it'll add that device to the queried devices, and then it'll just set this dot queried is true, which is used for just showing or enabling one of the buttons, which is just to clear the search. Along with that, you've got just a display of all of the devices. So it's basically what in terms of the backend, all it's doing is just doing a find for the MongoDB function with no query. So you're just getting all of the records, all of the device records. The only difference between each of the views is how you can interact with the devices. So for an admin, what you do is say you have a device, and then say a crowdsourcer has then created a revision. So we'll just do that quickly, just so you can see what it looks like. Actually, we don't need to create any. So here you can see it says this device needs merging. So in a normal case, you can just view the product. But in this case, you could either view it, or you could then merge. Whereas if you were a crowdsourcer, as you could see before, you just go straight into this create revisions page. So this image here is just basically the tooltip that says this device needed merging. So I think that's it for the admin. As well as that, you've got this add, which is just the, sorry, which is just to add the new device, but we'll go through that later on. For the crowdsourcer, it's very similar, except once you click one, you won't see any of the previously added details. You have a blank copy, and then you'll create your own revision. And then instead of creating a new device, you're adding a new feature. So there isn't much to discuss here for the crowdsourcer. Because of the way that Angular is modularized, all of this functionality, this is all in separate components, which makes it a lot easier and quicker to code. The other thing is the student. So we'll quickly, actually we don't need to. So here you've got these little checkboxes, which basically means you can compare. So I'll just show the code for that. So here we're just checking, so every time here we've got the checkbox. So you're just passing in the event, so the actual clicking event, and then the device itself, the device object you're passing in. It's also worth noting that with all of the views, the way that I'm displaying all of the devices is you're basically having a for loop. So of all of the queried devices that we discussed, how the queried devices, so without adding a query, without searching, all of the devices will be in the queried devices. So you're basically looping through all of the devices, and then for each device, you're just displaying all of its details, or all of these details. So as I said, when you're comparing, you're basically checking whether it's checked. So that basically means, say you do that, you don't want it to be added again. So yeah, it's just checking whether it's checked. And then it's checking whether you haven't got the maximum amount of devices that you can compare. So I've set it to 6 devices. So if it's not, then you add the device to the to compare array. Otherwise, you just prevent the click from checking. So yeah, so if you've got 6 devices and then you try and click one more, it will just it won't check. But if it's say you're at this state and you want to uncheck, you're basically just removing it from the so dot splice is just to remove values from the array. So just the position in the array, and then how many you want to delete. And that's just obviously it's just one device. And the functionality behind this compare button is you're basically storing all of their IDs. So these if statements are basically checking whether you have less than 6 devices. So if you have less than 6 devices, because of the way the backend is working, it'll always, so this endpoint will always take in 6 IDs. But obviously, if you don't have 6 devices that you've checked, you still want to input some value. Otherwise, the URL won't work, or the request won't work. So here, if it's what I'm doing is I've set all of them as 0. So for you to be able to compare, you'll always have to have at least two devices. So in this case, ID1 and ID2 will always be will always have values. For ID3 to 6, they'll be 0 unless they have a value. So then when you make your post request, you can just put all of these values in. So that's the dashboard. We'll go to the device. So as I showed before, for the admin, you've got this new device. It's very simple. All you're doing is just creating a new device record, as you normally would in, say, like a shopping app. And for each of the services that I'm using, we're just checking whether it's successful or not, just so you could let the user know. And obviously, because we've got the image uploader here, we have to handle whether it's uploaded or if there's been an error. And these are basically checked from the back end. And this delete files, basically, say you click crop here, that has, as it says here, it's uploaded. So it's been uploaded to the server. But say you want to change it, you don't want to keep that image on the file system. So once you click change, they'll send a delete request. So I'll show you what that looks like here. So here it's just the delete endpoint, and it's delete files. Basically, because I've allowed, I enabled the feature to delete multiple images. You can basically have an array of all of the file paths and pass it in. So in this case, there's only one. And this fs.unlink is basically it's a node function just to remove a file. So this you can get from just searching how to delete a file. So here you go. When you click change, it'll fire off this function, and then it'll set the image to null, so you can then change the device. So just to show you. So here you've got it's checking whether there's a device, if there's an image. So if there's no image, then you want this to appear again. That's what that's for. And likewise with the this select image, because it disappears once you've got an image there. It reappears once you've removed it. So we've already discussed how tags are created. So at this point, there's only two fields that you can add, which is the name and the manufacturer. Obviously, you don't have the technology that you can add here. Go through compare later on. View device is very simple. It's just loads the device. So this root.params.subscribe, basically it's just checking. So if you click on here, you've got the ID of the device. So here you're just extracting it from the URL parameters. So here you got parameters.id. So then you're setting that to the device ID, and then you're basically, if you're a crowdsourcer, it's not going to view the device. Instead, it will create a device revision and pass that parameter in. That way, you can use one function rather than multiple. So once you've got that ID, you can then get the device by ID, So it's very simple. You've just got get device by ID using a mongoose function, find by ID. You pass in the ID, and then it'll return the device. If there's no device, it'll tell you there's no device found. If there's an error, it'll pass that error and send it back. Right, so here it's checking, it's basically setting all of the values. I actually don't need this anymore, that doesn't matter. So yeah, it's just setting the image, name, manufacturer, and then the instructions is basically, I believe, let me just double check. It's basically this, but obviously there are no features, so that doesn't matter right now. So here it's basically checking whether the device has been merged or not. So if it's been merged, then there will be a price and there will be all of this information. Otherwise, if you try and set these values and they don't exist, well, it's unnecessary. There's no point setting these values if they don't exist. So it's just checking whether price exists. If price exists, that means it has been merged, and that means it's not a template. And then it's just setting the remaining values that you need. So this is basically, I'll give you an example now, just so. Right, so here, so you have the what do you call it? You have the, so this populate add features section is basically this area here. So once you click this this sort of table and this here image here, or the evidence here, needs to get populated by the values that are stored in this object. So that's what this is doing. So next I'll go through the create a create revision page. So that's basically for crowdsourcers. When they click on the device, they'll be able to enter in their details. So I'll close these. This one is quite long. So I'll go through some of the stuff that we're storing. So you've got the device itself. That's so you can get the image, the name, and the manufacturer. Then you've got the revision, which is just the ID of the device, and the revision itself, which will store its own version of the device object. Feature feature is just what's stored in a feature. So you've got the title, origin, purpose. I've gone through this before, but source, thumbnail, evidence type, and shortcut. Shortcut is initialized as 0 because not all evidence types will have a shortcut, and likewise with a thumbnail, not all will have a thumbnail. Oh yeah, okay, so old image is basically this image here. So you can see here that you can change the image if you want, otherwise it'll just use that later on. Predefined features are this list of features, so we're retrieving that from the database. So you can see that over here. So we're just Predefined features is just a categories and list from the element. That is the features from the response. Chosen features are basically anything that you add down here from here. So if you do this, and you add whatever list of features you have down here will populate this chosen features. Features added is pretty self-explanatory, just used for some UI checks, I think. So selected feature and selected media. The reason why they're like this, selected feature, is because it has to match so basically this drop down box and this drop down box to ensure that feature is selected as opposed to any random one. So it's basically for placeholder purposes. Same with this. The value has to be empty, just like here. And for some reason I tried the same here, but it wouldn't work. So I just had to use ph, just a sample placeholder, just so evidence media, as shown here, is selected on load. So I just double check. You've got evidence media and feature. Evidence is image and evidence is video, PDF, audio. That's basically just to, once you select that, that will decide which one of those is true, to ensure that the right button is shown, because obviously there are different functionalities for each one. This one's checking whether their image is video, same thing. But even beyond that, there's extra functionality. So the open modal is for when you're viewing evidence. So say, don't need that. So say we crop it just for a thumbnail. So now once we open this, we want to open the entire image in a modal, just like that. So the title, the source, the evidence type, and shortcut. I'm trying to, that's because we've modularized the evidence viewer, just so we don't have to have this modal for each. Let me show you, just so we don't have to have this HTML each time we want to open up a modal. So we're checking the reason why we're sending all of this information. So the title is shown here. The source is obviously to actually show the image itself, or the video, the PDF, audio. Evidence type is because you obviously want to show the right HTML tag for the appropriate evidence. Shortcut is because, say you have a video, so 18 seconds is the shortcut here. Once we click it, we want it to seek to that position. So that's why we're sending the shortcut. So here you can see seek video, same with audio, and then we're just checking the type, which is just used for here, checking whether it's an image to use an image tag, video tag. There's a separate component I created for the PDF because that's used elsewhere. And then same with audio. So falsify all media is basically when check where it's being used. So say we want to, so right now video is evidence. So let's just double check what so video is, evidence is video, is now true. But say you click on image, you don't want both of them to be true. So falsify is just making sure that all of every time this is changed, they're all set to false, and that way you can then do this, which is checking which value is in the selected media. So all of these values, depending on which one is selected, it'll set that evidence to true, and then it can basically display the correct button. Also, say you're on video and you've chosen the timestamp and it's uploaded. When you if you want to change that to image, you obviously want the evidence to reset. So that's what that reset evidence is doing. It's just setting all of the values that is stored. So source, thumbnail, shortcut, and evidence type to null and 0 for the shortcut. So yeah, once it's falsified the media, then it just checks the evidence type. We've already described what the populate add feature function does. Basically, if say you've added this and then it goes on to the left hand side and you've got the list, once you click on it, you want to be able to still view it. So the show upload is basically this button here for all of the different types. It's just checking whether the source is null. If it's null, then it'll display it. But say you choose a video and you've chosen the timestamp, this button will disappear as soon as it's chosen. There you go. But then if you change evidence, then all of that data that you've just stored will be set to null, and so basically do all of these. So that's what show does. Get category is basically used for, so once you've added a feature, what will happen is, as I said before, it'll go onto the left hand side, but the way that you want it to view is you want all of the, so say you're like you've got something similar to this, you want them to be categorized, and because of the way that the features are stored, so you've got the category, which is connectivity, and then you have an array of all of its features, so Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, as it has here. Just using the feature, you can't find what its key is. So the way that you have to find out what the key is, you have to basically use this get category function. So it's basically going through the entire predefined features. So basically this list here is checking whether that feature exists within that feature. Then it's checking what so it's looping through the entire predefined features, which is basically this. So it's looping through the categories, and then for each category, it's checking whether, so this Wi-Fi will check whether Wi-Fi is within it. It will store that loop index of the category. So this will be 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So storing that index, once it finds the correct feature, and the way it does that, it uses the index of. So if it's not equal to -1, so if it does exist, then it'll return the basically the category of that index that was stored. The create feature object is basically once you've added this here, it's creating that feature object. So now this is a feature, and the structure of that is just the category, the feature, the title, origin, purpose, all of these. and that is used here. So once you've added the feature, you've created the feature, then you want to add that to the list of chosen features. In this function, it's checking if the category already exists here. So if the category already exists, then you want to add it to this category object within the chosen features. So the way that the chosen features were, you've got an array of objects. So these objects are basically the categories. So you have category, connectivity, and you have the features, and then that will be an object in its, it will be an array of objects, and each object will represent a feature, so Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. So what you're doing is you're checking whether this category already exists. So if it already exists, then you're only creating a new feature as opposed to creating a whole category and feature, which is down below here. And the reason we're not doing an else here is because of the way that the check is, or the basically you're checking it exists, is it's doing it iteratively. So if you don't find it in the first iteration, you don't want it to then create it on the second, because you didn't find it in the first iteration, but it existed in the second or the third, or fourth, and so on. So that way you want to go through the entire list, and then if it's not found, so basically found is only true if it's found, otherwise it remains false, and that's why it's outside of this loop. That way it stops it from being created too many times. So yeah, if the category exists, then you only want to append to the features here. And by doing that, it's basically so that feature object that we created earlier. So go back to it. So this feature object with the category, the feature, all of the details you need. Just using that object to create a more structured format where it can just be pushed into the array. So you've got the feature, the evidence. So that's just the feature. You don't need the category information. So that is in the correct format for the feature object. And then you're just setting it to true. That way you don't have to do this side of things. So once you've created that feature, you need to then check if that feature already exists. So basically, because I've added the functionality to update a feature, you don't want it to then create another object called Bluetooth 4.0. You want it to just update the existing one. So here you're checking whether the feature exists. If it doesn't exist, then we want to add it to the chosen features. So basically add it into here or into here. And then you want to just say NFC, you want it to then tell you feature added. Otherwise, if it does exist, you only want it to update the feature. So it's quite all this is doing is it's just looping through all of the fields that you're storing, and then it's updating each one. And the feature exists. What that's doing is it's looping through the list of features, which is basically passed in from the chosen from here. The chosen features dot features, which is basically this array, is passed in to this function. it's looping through that entire list and it's checking whether that feature, so basically this value here, if that exists, as opposed to checking whether they all exist. It's just checking the feature value. Then if it does exist, then it's just basically sets found to true, otherwise it just returns the false. Down here, as I said before, if the category doesn't exist, you want it to create an entirely new object here, this object. So one here you'd add. Say you're creating a new category. So this object category, so basically in the same form as this, you've got the category, and then you've got the features where you're creating a new feature, as I showed previously. This else is for, so basically if all of that happens, if the chosen features is not empty. If it is empty, then we already know we need to create a new category. So that's what that's saying. So we're just creating a new category with the feature inside, and then adding that to the chosen features. We've gone through the reset. Reset form is basically so say you've done all of this and you update, you want this form to reset so then you can create your own feature again. So it resets all of the values you need. So falsify the media. So it resets this evidence media, resets this value to evidence media, this feature to feature, and then by changing this media, it has to falsify all of those. Nullifies all of the feature information, so title, origin, purpose. Resets the evidence, and then it changes the feature button, which is this, to add as opposed to update. Say so say you're over here and it will be add still. So this is only the case if it was changed from update. Add feature click. We've gone through that. So send revision to database. That's basically when you've so this is only enabled once you've added price and description. They are the only two requirements to create a revision. But as you can see, this is now enabled. You can change that by here at the bottom. You've got the create revision button. So here we've got disabled if it's valid, if it's not valid. So it's disabled when it's not valid, and it's that valid is changed based on the required field in each input. And it's the same with any other Angular form validations that you have. And device image. So this the required is only on the price and the description, whereas this button here, these are all required for that. So this is when you click the create revision button, it'll invoke this function. So we're creating a revision. So this is basically creating the data structure that's needed, the object which is needed for this array, because this revisions will store any number of revisions that users or that crowdsourcers have created. So the revision ID will just be the device's ID. This check here is basically checking whether you've added a pound sign or not. So if you don't add it, it'll add one for you. This will check whether you've changed the image. If you have changed the image, then it will set the price, description, set the image, the creator, and the technology. The way that the creator is taken is from the local storage. So I'll show you here. So you've got This is the information that's stored in local storage. So you've got the ID, email, name, user type, and username. So username will be stored in the creator. If image has not been changed, then all it has to do is change the price description, creator technology. So basically just not set the image. That could have been whatever. So once you've created the revision, so using the ID, it'll get the device. Then it'll send that revision to the database, which will, same with any other service, it'll check whether it was successful or not and let the user know. Create revision will just send the revision over to the backend. So add revision, this is how it's done. So it's got to find the device using the ID, and then it's just setting the ready to merge. So here you got the ready to merge field. That's used to basically inform the admin that it needs to be merged, and then it'll add to the revisions array that revision. We can do the merge revision now, or merge additions. So this is in displayed in stages. So we'll just do this just so you can take a look. So this is stage 1. So this this div here is basically just the chosen details, this whole sidebar. It's just a summary of everything that you choose from here on. As I said before, this merging area is split up into stages. So in stage 1, you're just selecting the image, storing the stage value here, so it's initialized at 1. Yeah, so as I said, the first stage is the image. Once I select it, it's green. Obviously, by default, this is green because it's already selected here. Likewise with the price, anything that's selected here will be here. And same with the features. So here, when you change it, it will change over here. So by clicking previous and next, you're just minusing or plussing 1 to the stage number. So this is stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. So any features that have already been chosen will be version selected. And the way that that's done, we've got this function going on. So this feature available. So this, obviously you can see it's bold. So this bold is checked when there's a feature available. So you've got the response to this function. The response is used here in this text, or this here in this success and text. So by default, it's click to choose a version, which is here. Click to choose a version. So what you're doing is you're going through the device's technologies that are already stored, and then you're checking whether they exist. Oh, sorry, whether this matches the ones in this list. If it does, then it'll select. Then it'll change the text to version selected, and it'll say the success is true, and then it'll return the response. Otherwise, it will just return this response. So that's done for each of these values here. And by clicking one of them, it'll open up this sidebar, and that basically just assigns this text here from here. sorry, here. If you click on it again, it will close, and the way that that's done is it checks whether this text, matches this text. If it does, then it'll just basically change this value to not shown. And basically this display is based on this value. If this is true, then this shows. If it's not, then it disappears. So if you do click on it, this will be shown, and then the all of the revisions will be set, and then in the front end you just have a for loop. So here you can see that this feature shown. You've just got a for loop showing all of the additions. It's not a very good example here because you only have one. But assuming that multiple additions existed, you'd have them listed one by one down below. And then by clicking one, you've got the evidence viewer modal component that I showed previously. You just got the title and the actual evidence itself with the shortcut, as you can see. So on edition selection is basically when you click on this, you're basically using that edition. You're passing that edition object onto into the function from here. Where is it? Here. So you're just passing the edition object, which is basically all of this information, passing it to this function. You're setting the edition selection to that. Is edition selection set to true, which is used for basically just enabling this button here. So this function here is just to basically say I've confirmed this. Just to have this green overlay, what you're doing is you're checking whether this exists in this list here. So you're basically going through the devices technologies, which is this list, and checking whether the source of this is stored within this object. So is edition chosen is basically just to change this. So this would normally be grey, change it to blue. So with an object, you can't do a direct comparison with another object. So what I'm doing is I'm changing it into just a long string. So as I said, we were setting the edition selection when you click this. So it basically stores this information. So what happens is if you have multiple editions down here, what you want is once you've clicked one, you want to match the information here with the information stored in the edition selected. And if it matches, then you want this to turn blue. And the reason you want that is because if you select another one, you want this to then return to grey. So confirm edition is basically once you've clicked confirm here. So what you want it to do is you want it to then be added to this list. So what you need to do is check whether that category exists. So say I wanted to add NFC when Wi-Fi already existed. It's similar to the example I gave before. You're just checking whether it exists. If it's found, you want to set it to true so it doesn't invoke this code. So basically, what you're doing is you're just adding to the list of features within that structure, rather than creating a whole new feature. This extra check is basically say you already had Wi-Fi, but then you wanted to change the source or the evidence. So if the feature was already found, then you just want to update the evidence. If it wasn't found, then you want to create an entirely new feature within that category. Otherwise, if there's no category, you want to create a new category and a new feature. So for merge, that's when you select this merge button. What you're doing is you're creating the tags for the searching. So by creating the tags, you're creating a list of the categories, which are these, and all of the features as well. So you're just going through the technology object, or the array, sorry. And then you're just pushing all of the category names into that array, into the list of categories. It's the same with the objects. Sorry, it's the same with the features. Once you're done with that, you want to clear all of the revisions because you don't want to continue storing revisions now that you've say declined all of the other evidence. You want to set ready to merge to false because you're already merging, and then you just want to update device, the device object, because you've already here you're storing the entire device object, so you don't need to update, rather replace. So we just got the merge device service. Now, as I said previously, so you're just replacing the entire document. So here you've got just the query to find the ID, to find the device with the ID. So that's the merge done. So for the compare, we've got this going on. So we've got all of the features, the categories and the features below. Right, so this is a little complicated. So with the devices, you're going to have up to 6, as I said before. So the remaining 4 are all zeros. So you want to load the devices so you can store the records themselves. So you want to get the device by IDs. I showed this earlier. And then for each of the devices that you get, you just want to add them to the devices object that you've created. So this is just an array of the device object, this device object. And the way that this is structured, because it is a table, and I'll just show you, because of the way the tables work in HTML, you've got things that work in rows as opposed to columns. So for this row, you're storing just the image, and for this row, you've got you've got this image and the name. For this row, you've got manufacturer, you've got Amazon and Apple. So the way that you can relate them to the correct device is by storing them in the appropriate position in the array. So this is this is position 0, this is position 1. So 1 will always be Amazon Echo, and likewise with Reddit 3. So we're having to store separate objects or separate arrays for the image, the name, manufacturer, price, description, and then a device map. So we'll create the list of device details, which is basically the image, the name, the manufacturer, and the price. So what you want to do is you want to for each of the devices, you just want to add the image to the device images, the names, with all the price description, with all of them. I don't think I use description in this, but if you wanted, you've got description there. So that's all pretty simple. It's just simple pushes into the arrays. But for the feature device map, because of the you want all of so for Reddit you don't have Wi-Fi, NFC, or thermometer, but you still want all of the features to be displayed. as a list down here, whether or not they are applicable to these devices. So for each of the device, you want to basically check whether the category already exists. So for instance, you've added connectivity and Wi-Fi, but you want to add NFC. You don't want to add another category, connectivity here, then add NFC to that. So you're just checking whether it exists, as I said before. If it does, then you want to just add the feature. So the way that this looks is you've got an array. So this is called the feature device map. You got an array of an object. In this object, you'll have the category. So we'll say connectivity. You'll have features, which will be an object. Sorry, it will be an array of objects. And within each object, you'll have the feature name. And then you'll have the devices. And this will be an array. So what happens is you're checking for whether the category exists. So say we've got now, we have the category is connectivity, and then we have the feature as NFC. So you want to check that the category exists. So here the category will exist. Then you want to check if the feature exists. In this case it doesn't within this array. If it does exist, then you want to, so let's just say we've got NFC and Wi-Fi. If it does exist, then you only want to add the device ID. So we'll call this ID is 1, and then the device, let's just say edit. So we'll just add in the ID, which is ID1. So that you're doing for every feature. So then for the next feature, you're checking if NFC exists. It doesn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, then you want to create a new feature and then push it into this array. So then you just want to do the next object, feature NFC devices, and then you want to add in the device ID. But if the category doesn't exist, then like before, you're just adding a new category, basically a new object like this. And the way that you check whether it should be an X or a tick is in the HTML. You are basically listing all of the, so as I said before, you've got this list of categories and features. So for each category in the feature device map, so as I said, it looks like this. You got the category and you got the features. So for each category, you want to have a field here of the category. And the reason why there's is device 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is because they'll take up different widths of this column. So right now this is only taking up 3 columns. As you can see, 1, 2, and 3. But if you had 6, you want to take up the full width. So if you go up to 6, you want it to take up 7. So 6 devices plus this left side. But for this scenario, we're only using 1 line for each of these rows. So we're using this. So for each category, you're showing these values, and then for every row below that, you want to show the feature. So for every feature, you want to show the feature here. And then for every device in the devices list, you want to check whether it has that feature. And that basically checks whether the ID of the device is stored within the within this list over here, in this devices list. If it does, then it shows this code. If it doesn't, it shows this code, and those codes just relate to these. The evidence viewer, I believe we went over briefly, but I'll go through it in more depth now. So the main functions are just to seek video and seek audio, and then just to check what type of format it is. These are all parameters that are just passed in. So it's just a bootstrap modal. Most of it is just like one-liners. So if it's an image, it only shows this, it won't show this, and it won't show this, and it won't show this. And then you just got the close buttons. This app view PDF we'll go through in a bit. So we'll go over the create feature. So for this, you need to be a crowdsourcer. So for create feature, all you have to do is load the features from the database. So I'll quickly show you what the features look like in the database. For each category, you've got a document, and then within the document, you've got the category name and a list of features. So you're loading those from the database and creating the list, predefined categories. So that's what you're getting over here, this list just of categories. So what happens is you can select from an existing category and then simply add a feature. Otherwise, you can create a new feature. Pretty straightforward. And by doing that, by selecting one of these, you're just populating the value for the category. Otherwise, if you create new, then it'll just use that value, and then all of the processing is done in the server. Right, so on the server, you've got the create feature endpoint. So here you're just passing in the request parameters, the category and the feature, and then passing it to the add feature function. So here what you're doing is you're checking whether the category exists already. So we're just doing a normal MongoDB function where we're just passing in the category. So if it does exist, we're just checking whether the feature already exists, because we don't want a user to be able to add a feature multiple times. You have to, in JavaScript, you can't have unique arrays, so you have to convert it to a set, which is basically the equivalent. So by creating a set, you can then add in the feature. If it exists, it won't be added. If it doesn't, then it will. Then you need to create it back to an array, because MongoDB doesn't support sets. If the category does not exist, then you just need to create a new category, basically in the same format as this. Create a category and create a list of features. ID will automatically be created. The navigation bar, nothing too advanced other than you can only see the navigation bar if you're logged in. So if I log out, there's no navigation bar. And that's basically just uses the authentication service logged in function. And then the logout just clears, it basically uses the authentication logout function, which basically clears the local storage. Uploads, so for audio, basically finding the audio element in the HTML, just so we can extract the way this works with the video as well. So we'll just do video. So once you click on this, once you've chosen choose timestamp, you want to store this value 18. So you need to basically get the HTML element, and then the shortcut is basically that element dot current time, and then you're using the upload service along with the file that you've uploaded, then upload it to the server. I'll quickly show you the server side code for this. So with the audio, you're using a library called, or with all of file uploads, using a library called Malta. And for this, you need to give it some options. So you need to just tell it the destination. So the destination is basically the public folder uploads evidence and audio. So this is the folder within the server. Here are the uploads. So the device will store the images for the devices, the evidence for the evidence, and then it's split up into the file types. So yeah, for the options, you've just got the destination, and then a file filter is basically just to ensure that the type of file is that corresponds to the media that you're uploading. So it's just checking the MIME type against JPEG and PNG. So they're the only two file types for image. For video, just MP4. PDF is PDF. Audio has a number of supported files. To delete a file, you're using the node library, the fs.unlink, along with the file path. The only difference between the file uploads is the video, because we're doing some extra server-side processing where we generate a thumbnail. We're basically taking the shortcut or the timestamp. We're then creating a name for the file. So we're just calling it screenshot dash and then the date, just to create a unique name. And then we're using the function here, which uses the ffmpeg library. The reason we're using this ffmpeg installer is because in terms of servers, we don't have control over whether they have ffmpeg already installed, which is a necessity for this. So over here, we're just using one of the functions that's included, which is just to take a screenshot. We're only using one. We're inputting the timestamp from the front end, the size of it, and where exactly we want it to be saved to. And then the file name, which I said was created here. The view PDF is just a component that I've reused in multiple instances. It's just using a PDF viewer component. I've added in functionality to change the page whilst it's up. I'll show you here. So there are different modes that you can have. You can display all of the pages um, one after the other, or you could just show one as it is here, but then add a function to basically change the page and also change the page like that. So that's what this is doing. Show all is basically just so it only shows one page. The source is the PDF source. Render text is just so you can render the text as opposed to as an image. The zoom, self-explanatory. The page number, the page is the page number. So this is where we can control it through the previous and the next, as well as the changing in the input. After the PDF has been changed, has been loaded, sorry, we're basically creating or storing the number of total pages. So this 69 here, and these loaded and this emit here is basically for the other pages that are using this component can use this to basically control the loading screen. And this loaded is used for showing the controls. So the controls will only show once the PDF has been loaded, otherwise you won't get the right values.